So our next speaker, Ron McBurnie, is the first of two presentations about postcards made by artists. He's a visual artist from Townsville, taught at James Cook University, and was a co-director of Lyrebird Press. So, yes, Ron.
Thanks for Artspace for inviting me to speak or letting me speak, which is great. So I'll be talking about postcards, but I was asked to talk a little bit about my past earlier work, so I'll do a little bit of that first. A lot of the works I'll be showing are collaborative works, so they've been made with a few people or a lot of people. And collaboration's been a large part of the work that I've made over the years. The first work I'm showing here is one called God Dog, and it's probably the first artist book I made in 1991. Before I talk about the postcard aspect of this speech, this paper, I'll talk a little bit about these very early works. So it was a book made and presented in a tin with a piece of wire, and the wire and the tin relate to the story of the creation of the dog by the little boy. As well as creating God Dog, I created a work called Bizarre Sexual Practices of North Queensland at the same time. It was a silly book presented in a latex glove. The glove actually hasn't aged very well, so I didn't bring a copy down. Need to change gloves. This already feels, to me, like this talk feels like a deep confession at an Artist Books Anonymous meeting. I was also trying to remember why I initially began to make artist books. I think that I had a few ideas that I thought would be best in the artist book form, but I know that Noreen Graham of Graham Galleries would be partly to blame for me starting to make artist books, and also visits to different countries like, what's that big bookshop in New York City that sells artist books? Printed Matter. A few trips to Printed Matter where I saw some amazing books. And books to me, I've never thought about making them to sell. For me, books are like tiny exhibitions. They're small moments of beauty. They're a way of meeting and collaborating with other artists. This is a selection of Lyrebird books that we made. I began teaching visual art, and in particular printmaking, in 1980 in Townsville. Throughout the 90s, while teaching full-time at James Cook University, I made and published many artist books of my own, or with Lyrebird Press, that Tate Adams and I had bought out of retirement in the early 90s and housed at JCU after he moved from Melbourne to Magnetic Island and off the coast of Townsville. That's just a selection of some of the books. This is a work titled Whistling with the Angels by Glenn O'Malley, 1995. While printing and making those books at Lyrebird, I was fortunate to work with many artists and writers from different corners of the country. Many remain close friends and long-term collaborators. When we published books at Lyrebird, Tate preferred the more traditional libre d'artiste form, while I sometimes strayed and was interested in extending the book form in a slightly more off-the-wall way, experimental direction. So we created off-the-wall Lyrebird books where we made small artist books as well as multiples. And this is an example of Glenn's multiple. Also worked with Noreen Graham on a number of projects. This is the first artist book fair catalogue, which was in itself an artist book. There we are. It's called Beware Books by Artists. And a number of artists were commissioned to make sort of multiples to go into the book. And that's the multiple that I did, which was a bookmark, an etching as a bookmark. I also supplied the dust jacket covers for this book, which were printers' outcasts. And these outcasts were just large pieces of paper, and we tore those down and they became the covers that we printed on top of. Another project I worked on as a collaborative project more recently in 2005 was with Aki van Octrop. And this was titled Paper Memory. The image you're seeing there is a Bruce Petty image for the cover, which was a wraparound cover. In 2005, we worked on this project for the Sydney Art on Paper Fair. We selected artists and poets to work together. So I selected the artists, or Aki selected the artists, then they selected poets to work with. And it was all about the theme of the memory of paper. And this was to commemorate the 10th year of the Sydney Art on Paper Fair. We did that in an edition of 200. And here's a few pages from that book. And you can see the combination of different this type, photocopy, transparent papers, opaque papers, and so on. The next project I'll mention, another collaborative project from a few years back, 2013, is a large book called Hearsay. And on this book I worked with Ewan MacLeod, artist Lloyd Jones, a New Zealand author, and it was made in 2013. I began to make prints with Ewan in the early 2000s, but from 2011 to 2013, we worked on this enormous concertina artist book, Hearsay, with words by Lloyd Jones. It was designed in France with plates drawn, etched and printed in Sydney and Townsville. I think we did edition of 12 of this book. The original idea was that the paper, we used really heavy paper, I think it was 600 GSM, and we wanted it to stand up on its own, but it didn't do that. So we had to make either perspex folded sections, or we'd hang it in the middle of the gallery in the air, and so on. In recent years, in my downtime from painting and drawing, I've come back to making and collecting multiples, particularly simple forms like the concertina or sets of related cards. These are really modest artworks. The history of people sending picture postcards began in the 1890s, but artists making postcards and sending them began sometime in the 60s. In the remainder of the talk, I'll give you a taster, more likely a teaser of a few artists who made them and why I like the work and their influence on my subsequent collaborations with artists, which are the recent ones have been postcards. In 1996, while in London exhibiting at the London Book Fair with Noreen Graham, I stumbled upon two very different sets of cards. These led to my interest in further collecting of cards and eventually making my own card series. The first cards collected were lining the insides of London phone boxes in Tottenham Court Road area, near where we were staying. The call girl cards on the walls were colourful and varied in size and subject matter. There were hundreds of them. I went on early morning sprees, collecting as many copies as I could in the hope of using them for a project. I often had to look over my shoulder in case the card posting pimps were after me. I didn't see any, but I was a little bit worried. The book that resulted from those escapades was called Long Shots. I worked with poet Elizabeth Springer. We made it in 1998. When I returned to Australia, we worked for quite a while on that book. We made a selection from the cards, and Elizabeth wrote short poems in which she endeavoured to humanise and give a story to each of the women in the images. So it was we wanted to change the nature of the way people looked at these cards. My favourite cards were those that included text somewhere near the image confirming that this was a genuine photograph. They're just a few of the pages from Long Shots. The second set of cards from my 1996 trip to London were found at an Art Remainders bookshop in an office block near the Thames. Just beside the payment desk was a small glass vitrine with a selection of about 50 cards and pamphlets made by British environmental artist Richard Long, or in collaboration between Long and his gallery. I was intrigued by the use of the photographs and his journeys in conjunction with simple phrases or maps noting places he walked through or distances travelled. The card group was substantial enough to give me insights into the variety of places and terrain Richard Long journeyed through and a consistency of ideas and purpose. So I purchased the cards and took them home and wondered what the hell I'd do with them. The next artist who was an influence on the cards I make is Richard Tipping. A lot of you probably know his work. This was a set that I bought at the New South Wales Art Gallery called Multiple Pleasures. I also was interested in this. I love the wordplay of these particular works, and Richard recently sent me a few more cards, and I've got those at the table if people want to see them. I like the quirky manner in which he used his text and the way he changed signs, and it was a lovely play. The other person was Yoko Ono, and I love this. I used to own a copy of this card. I think an institution has it now, but I love the way she just created this card by this small hole, and it's called A Hole to See the Sky Through, Yoko Ono, 1971. And it was a part of a number of performances she did. I love the playfulness of the card. And it also reminds us, when we look through it, of the beauty of our surroundings. I'd also like to mention Robert Jacks, the influence of his work on some of the work that I'm doing now and earlier work that I did. This is a hand-stamped set of postcards from 2007 by Robert Jacks. For some reason, one of them has gone missing. Okay, so you have to imagine a number of books, about 15 books of hand-stamped books that we made, and I've got some of those on the table. But this set of books that we made as a response to Robert Jacks were with a number of artists throughout the country. We invited the artists to make a stamped book, a single stamped book, and send that stamped book to us. And then we had a number of people that stamped those books, and then we sent a number back to the artists, and we kept those stamped books. And that was made in 2007, and it was called the Stamp Book Collection. And I worked on that with artist Stephen Spurrier. The next set was a solo set called Holy Fluxus, and it's a response to the Yoko Ono card. So this was my first set of cards, and each of the cards, which was typeset by Cherie Kinleyside, has a hole in it, and the hole relates to the image. So you can, like the bottom one on the left is obviously a hole in one, and the cake at the top is cake hole, and so on. So or drill hole, and so on. Another project I worked on with Stephen Spurrier and Cherie Kinleyside in 2001 was a book called I Walked with a Human. I worked with Stephen on another project called the Mandible Project, which hasn't come to fruition yet, but it will. I Walked with a Human was made with a combination of photocopy, letterpress and digital printing. And the cover was related to those early science fiction compendiums of stories, like Amazing Stories and things like that. These are some of the pages. And we used as our model a Russian children's book about parts of the body. Okay, now on the postcards. So just a little bit about Stephen Spurrier. This is a card from 1991 that he sent. Stephen's been sending interesting postcards to people since the 70s while he was travelling overseas. These became a preamble for many of the collage and mixed media artist books he began to make in the late 90s. After moving to Toowoomba in 1998, Stephen began to utilise the photocopier as part of his art making. Over the years, Stephen has posted to me alone over 50 cards. This early self-portrait as a diver was posted in 2001. Is that 2 minutes or? Okay. Okay, there's some other ones. Another influence is by Janet Devar. I met Janet recently after doing research on her work, and she made a number of very interesting political postcards in the 80s. She was working for the Leeds Postcard Company, and I was really excited to meet Janet. This is another one of hers, made in 1981. The Leeds Postcards Company made some really interesting cards, and you can still find them on the web for purchasing. The one on the left is Haywayne with cruise missiles, and that was made by Peter Kennard in 1983. Very interesting company. This work I really like. Jill Posner did a whole series of postcards related to sort of buggered up, as you'd call it, because I think there was a place in a group of people called Bugger Up in Australia, and there's books you can buy about their work. But this is a British woman who was a photographer, and she found some fantastic billboards, and I really, really like her work. This was done in 1979 by Jill Posner. I think I've got this card on my table, so I can show you that. The last few slides are about the recent projects. This is called All at Sea. The recent card sets that I'm doing with other artists are all in editions of 200, and they're signed by the artist. So this is the first one as a test group of my work. So there's the images of at sea, images made at sea, as it were, and they correspond. They've got a geolocation on the back of the image, and they correspond with the map that you can fold out in the postcard set. The next set I worked on with Anne Thompson and Elizabeth Springer, who I've worked with on the Call Girl cards. This is from the beach, and Anne was making these wonderful little coral sculptures on Magnetic Island, and we were photographing those, and we thought we'd do a book, but I thought it would be easier to do a set of postcards, and Elizabeth responded with poetry relating to each of the images. So on the back is the poems, on the front are the images, and it comes in a wonderful little fold-out box. Preservative 220 is a set made with Jonathan McBurnie and Christian Flynn, like a graphic novel. And the last set of cards with Ewan McLeod. There's 13 cards, a sticker, like the idea of stickers. And these are related to a journey he did through New Zealand. There's also, the box folds out into a map as well of the journey, and each of the cards relate to the map. So I'll keep making cards until I either stop having fun or run out of ideas and money. As I said, you can see those cards on my table. Thank you.